敏捷谈话节目破马张飞今天是周五这是我们历史上第二次这个把我们的时间从周六调到周五这个为什么这么隆重呢？
Recording in progress.
这个就是因为我们这次请到2位重量级的嘉宾一位呢是我们非常熟悉的老朋友我们的萧然老师，来，萧然老师跟大家打个招呼。
大家好
这个非常简洁行，又没有声音，What's up？ 稍等一下，我看什么情况。很多人说没有声音我们导播在这个好，非常整齐没有声音有声音了，说一声 OK， 好，有声音的小伙伴扣个1好吗？来，我们看一下现在什么情况重新开场好吧好，那就再来一遍好，各位破马张飞的听众朋友们，大家晚上好欢迎来到由2021年领域驱动设计峰会的冠名播出的非著名在线敏捷谈话节目破马张飞各位小伙伴这次呢我们是周五提前开播。为什么这么隆重呢因为我们请到2位重磅嘉宾这个一位是我们非常熟悉的萧然老师，萧然老师再次跟大家打个招呼。
大家好。
好萧然老师呢这次呢前2次其实身份都不太一样第一次呢来的时候呢是以一位数字化转型专家的身份第2次来呢是以中国敏捷教练企业联盟秘书长的身份。这次呢是一个什么身份呢这个先卖个关子等一会儿再说。好，那接下来我们非常隆重的来介绍一下我们另外一位嘉宾我们这个来自新加坡的Cynefin 这个 Framework 的创始团队成员亚太区的专家 Jen。Hello Jen。
大家好。
好Jen，你要不简单做一个自我介绍吧？
可以。那我就是过去11年跟 Cynefin 一起工作，就是创造这个 Cynefin 框架的公司。那我们就是因为这个公司一直都是在新加坡组结的，那所以就在新加坡跟新加坡政府这些的就有做过很多不一样的 project。所以希望可以今天跟你们介绍一些，很高兴的可以跟萧然老师一起来谈这个 Cynefin Complexity 的题目。那么谢谢你了。
好，这个非常非常感谢这个用中文做了一个自我介绍这个特别棒今天呢这个说过了我们今天呢是全程的英文聊天这个我们就不难为Jen了Jen其实母语还是这个英文，所以这个我们接下来会是以这个英文的形式来展开对话在这个过程中呢我们可能会开启字幕，能帮助大家稍微这个理解一下整个的内容大多数内容我相信不会特别困难，而且刚开场的时候呢Jen会给我们一个这样的我们叫做术语表一样的东西至少能让大家先了解一下我们今天谈论的主要的一些关键词是什么。好的，那这个话不多说那我们就直接开始。Then we just start our listening comprehension. OK， 有没有想起被这个又一次想起这个被大学4、6级支配了恐惧小伙伴们我们其实好久没有英文直播了，对吧？那我们这次再来一波。好。That we just start our topics today. So today's topic is about the complexity. At the beginning, so we'd like Jen to make some brief introduction and whatever you want to start, that is your turn.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share screen. So instead of giving it all in English, we've actually translated the Cynefin framework already into Chinese, so it's easy. So the framework, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but Sharon and I thought that we would give a very quick introduction and overview, the framework essentially has 5 domains. So it's not a 2x2 model. It's actually 5 different domains, and we'll talk through them. Very simply, you can actually think about the framework as 2 domains on the right and another 2 on the left. The domains on the right, at the bottom is the clear domain, and at the top is complicated. So these 2 domains are quite similar in the sense that in these domains, there is causal order. So there is linear causality. So very simply, this is what we all learned in school when we were taught science, right? If you do A, B happens. If you observe it all the time, this relationship occurs all the time, then we know that this is a stable relationship. So it's clear to us, right? In the complicated domain, however, this is the domain of experts. So it's only clear to an expert. So maybe if I do A and I keep the conditions of B consistent, C will always happen. So this is where, we make the difference between a bicycle and an airplane, for example, right? A bicycle, even a child can look at it and they'll know what to do with it. It's a very clear system. But with an airplane, you need to be trained in some kind of engineering that is linked to that airplane, so you know how to fix it. But in both cases, the system is ordered, meaning I can take it apart, put it back together again. The system doesn't change. It's repeatable. I can do the same thing every single time. It's not going to change. The thing is, a lot of our understanding of management, of engineering, particularly, and I know in this case, we're going to be talking about software engineering, and Sharon will be able to share some examples later on. A lot of engineering and management that we're used to, decision-making, is based on things that sit on the right side of the framework, where causal order exists. But the problem, particularly, for those of us who work very closely with understanding user needs and how they're evolving, how needs emerge, is that we realize things are not that straightforward. Often, if you look at the top left-hand side of the framework, that's where the complex, 复杂性, right? That's where they exist. In the complex domain, what we realize is there is no repeatable order, and it's not linear and causal. If I do A, it goes into a cloud, right? It's misty, and I don't know what happens. I only know what happens when I look back, and I can connect the dots when I'm looking back. But that's not helpful because most of the time we have to build and plan forward. So therefore, the approach that we have to take then has to be more step-by-step, emergent, and one thing at a time. So I'm going to pause and ask Sharon to chip in a little bit and see whether he wants to add something into what I've covered.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think probably a lot of people have saw this previously and trying to apply it. Certainly, I think before we get into software engineering and software architecture, all of us can feel it because of COVID. Like we have been in this discussion for a while, right? So if we're looking at the COVID situation nowadays, we realize that things are not that easy, right? In the sense like it's really hard to identify the causal relationship anymore. So instead of talking about that you have to trace back to the causal relationship, we start to realize that the world surrounding us is actually quite complex. There's parameters we can tune or we can change, but we don't understand all the parameters. That's in the sense, I think, then echoes back to what you are talking about, the 复杂性, right? Complexity. I think recently there was a case, a lot of us was discussing about it. Like Singapore used to be a country exercising the zero case, right? So you lock down the country and you say nobody leaves. And if there's a COVID case, we have to trace back to the source. Now, if I looking at it last month, right, the Prime Minister of Singapore actually publicly announced and say, okay, so we started to realize that there's different parameters or different effects we have to consider. And after careful calculation or analysis, we realized that we cannot close the border anymore. To me, this is actually a vivid example of dealing with complexity. It's hard choice, but I think as a human, like you always trying to understand the pro and cons. From that perspective, I'm actually quite interested. What do you how you feel right now?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think COVID has been a global lesson in complexity. You know, in the past, people would say, oh, you know, this is just an academic science. It doesn't apply to our business. It doesn't apply to our work. But now everyone's like, oh, the world is complex. Things are uncertain. It's been very interesting because part of the Cynefin framework is also about defining the different domains by the type of constraints that exist in it. So in the ordered domains, in particularly the clear domain, what you are able to use are very rigid constraints. Like that's a very firm constraint, it never changes, right? Or in the case of the complicated domain, you use governing constraints. They're still very strong constraints. And if we take COVID as an example, border closures are actually very firm constraints. They're governing, right? We're going to close the borders. Interestingly enough, I think in the past few months, countries are selectively opening borders, right? They're going into bilateral agreements and all that. So it's moved from a rigid constraint to a governing constraint, but also the borders become more porous, right? They're opening up specifically. But more interesting to me is how all the countries have found a very useful enabling constraint, which is what we use in complexity. If you think about the mask that everyone wears, that's interesting. It's an enabling constraint, and we carry that enabling constraint everywhere. When the mask first came out, I remember like countries in Asia, we're used to the mask, right? So it's easy for us. And there was a very beautiful article that was written by a journalist. I think she's American, but she lives in China. So there you go. So she was saying that she studied the history of the mask, and the mask actually started in the 1930s, and it was founded by a Malaysian Chinese doctor during one of the plagues. And it's interesting because for me, in Asia, we're used to wearing the mask even before COVID, right? If you were sick, you would wear the mask. It was just something you did. And the concept is I'm protecting my friends. Right. So it tells us something about the social contract, you know, about relationships and how in different societies, relationships are built along different constraints. To us, it's very natural to say, I want to protect the people around me. But if you look at in certain other countries, the argument was, I don't want to wear the mask. It's my right. I don't mind getting sick. But you start to see how the constraints are cultural as well. Mm-hmm. So that's really pushing into the very human aspect of it, the complex domain, and how we need to factor in different cultures, different types of expectations.
Yeah. I think then you just outlined an important aspect. I think you and David in the Cynefin, I think the things we need to understand, the complexity, like you guys want to talk about ends through complexity. It's about human, right? It's about social society. That's actually quite important if we, because I just gave a talk on today's conference talking about almost a similar thing. Because for software development or software engineering in general, there is a unique characteristic compared with other engineering field, is that it's more like a social it's more like a social activity, right? It's more about developers amongst all developers, like they have established some kind of a social contract to understand each other. I guess that's why there's more acceptance in the IT field about Cynefin, and more people from like Agile communities and DDD communities started to join the Cynefin. And I think the root cause is that they started to realize that there's a similarity between software development and software engineering in general with social activities.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I know, I mean, everyone looks at China because your software infrastructure is, you guys have developed so quickly in the past 10, 20 years. But some of my clients, particularly clients who have been around for 100, 200 years, and these tend to be clients who have had to build over a lot of existing inherited pathways.
Yeah.
And they don't have the same, they're suffering from the constraints of their old system. They don't have this, really the agile mindset, I think, is amazing. And I particularly love talking about complexity in a Chinese environment because a lot of Chinese philosophy, a lot of the things that we're used to hearing are actually very complexly coherent. Like, the concept of safe to fail, we do one step at a time. It's like 摸着石头过河. It's the same concept. It's the same. And it's a lot of like my clients who had, for example, started as hardware companies. They had to build hardware and then slowly move their mindset, move the way they assemble their products into a more software-driven environment. And you start to see that they have this mindset, which is still very stuck in this set way of doing things. They don't realize that, there's always going to be bugs. You can fix the bug after you ship it. It's an interesting twist. It's different for them. And I mean, I'd love to hear experiences from the Chinese environment as well about how it's different.
I think it was I had a dinner with Dave back about the second DDD conference. What struck me the most was Dave was mentioning saying like Chinese people like me were so much into Western philosophy. Like our education system is basically designed and trying to learn something from the Western world. He said, like, it's time for you guys to realize that there's a part to play about the East philosophy. Like, what are you guys, the ancestor of your ancestor developed? And he talked about that, realizing something as a whole, like just you sort of mentioned that. And we started to realize that there's something about the rooted from China, right? The Eastern philosophies may help us to realize that there's complexities amongst us. But still, I think there's a lot of lessons, especially industrial and in the commercial world. Still a lot of Western innovations showed us the way things is going to change, right? We talk about it's also very famous in China about Tesla, right? So Tesla opens this gigafactory in Shanghai. I'm sitting in Shanghai right now. It's quite interesting. The founder of Tesla, Elon Musk, his idea about changing the industry, right, using a very different approach, right? So he's not understanding he's almost a genius in understanding like redesign, re-engineering some of the field like automotives, where we thought it's going to be purely a symbol line, but he changed that. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think we talked about this with so many people that, everyone's trying to sort of talk about how big Tesla has grown in comparison with other car companies, like how they've overtaken Toyota, they've overtaken BMW, so on and so forth, right? But I think that it's interesting that that's the comparison they're making, because I think that, and I suspect, this is my suspicion, of course, I do not know Elon Musk, but I think if you spoke to Elon Musk, he would tell you, that Tesla was never a car company. That was never his intention. Tesla is selling you a lifestyle. Tesla is selling you completely different type of approach to energy, to movement, right? When I was living in the US a couple of years ago, I considered buying a Tesla car. So I went to the website, and it's remarkable because you buy it and they drive it directly to your house. And they also ask you if you want to set up a solar, solar energy collection system in your house. So they will set up the solar panels on your roof, they'll set up the charging system, and the solar panels then can also power your house. So Tesla was never a car company. It was never about that. It was a tech company to begin with.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's there's a lot of things. Like if we talk about software engineering, I was talking about the human side of the tech software architecture today, because people started this illusion about it's a clear domain, right? Because it's engineering, there must be some kind of a best practice and good practice. But in fact, if you're looking at software through the lens of time, you started to understand that software is actually a living thing. It's growing.
Yeah.
If you don't change the software anymore, it means that this software is going to die. Nobody is using it.
Yeah.
But if somebody is using it or it's getting more attention from the customer, then you do to change it over time. So that's an interesting characteristics about this industry or this so-called engineering field. So it's moving. And also, as if I do a comparison between what you just mentioned about the different parameters or constraints, right? In software space, we will say almost a bug is inevitable. I will always have bugs. Like you fix the bugs, and as long as you can fix it quickly, we don't believe it's same, right? But if you, in the traditional engineering field, if it's a bug, it's going to cost you something. Right? So the customer is not going to be happy, right? So if a traditional Mercedes-Benz, you have some trouble with your engine, somebody is going to sit on the roof and say, okay, so this is not the quality I want. But compare with that, if it's software, people in general accept that it's going to be a lot of small issues, you need to hot fix it.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. That gives us a hint to like in software space, we are almost certain to deal with in the complex domain. Right? So we should not assume like we are dealing with a clear or complicated domain problems.
Yeah, I think so. The tension I find for a lot of clients is they know that, but they're somehow so worried. I always ask them, what are you so worried about? It's code. You can't break it. You can't break it. It's not a physical product. It's not hardware. You cannot break it. It's very interesting, when they hear that, they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And this is particularly for people, again, moving from more traditional business environments into digital strategy. I think the other thing that came to my mind as well, because it's linked to the domain-driven design conference, is DDD was introduced in 2004. When it was introduced, business and IT were still seen as separate departments, right? But I think now business and IT are very much the same thing, because your digital strategy is your business strategy. It is your growth strategy. If your business strategy is not digital, then you're not doing it right? Like I think I was watching a conference talk the other day on the metaverse. And so like the speakers were saying that actually it's so scary, because the rate that the metaverse can, the concept of digital twinning. So you will build the city to follow the development of the physical city, right? And then like things like dance moves, funny dance moves become commodities in the digital world. And they can become viral much more quickly. So you're actually testing, your feedback loop is so quick, with digital, with IT, with software, that it's almost like you have to be willing to take the risk to, just jump and do some things differently, because otherwise you're not going to get the kind of improvements that you need.
Yeah, I like the articulation you just mentioned, right? So the book, actually DDD 2003, right? 2004 hit the market. In general, I think at that time, people feel like it's a good idea, but it's going to cost you something, right? You want to establish some kind of a ubiquitous language. Everybody knows language is going to be expensive, right? Regardless if it's a natural language or it's just programming language, but switching language is a big thing. And we are talking English. We are causing some trouble with the audience. The audience will say, okay, so it's hard to understand because I'm not English natives. But in 2000, I think in 2000, about 2014, 2015, 10 years after, it becomes very hot. I think just as you said, Jen, it's like business and technology realize that we have to work together, right? So this is important for us to understand each other, and the product or service is not isolated two parts. It's one part. It's a product, and you have to ship the product. So that's really, I think, DDD becomes attract a lot of attentions. I want to emphasize on this because our intention when we established the DDD China conference is to invite people from both camps to join. But unfortunately, I think maybe there's some COVID uncontrollable parameters there as well. You gradually see like people from the business side feels, okay, so this is a programming thing, right? This is engineering. Let the software engineers to take care of it. It's nothing to do with us. But it's a good articulation, like we need to fix it. The intention or why we started this conference is having a platform for business people and software engineering people can talk to each other, can start to realize that essentially this digital innovation requires both parties to work together. And who knows, right? Maybe in the future, we will have generations with business and technology mind all together.
I think so. What I'm starting to see in some of my clients as well is a shift from a project-focused approach to a more product-focused approach. Because I think, some of the criticisms that they have, like business has made of IT, and then also IT, of course, makes a business, is that everyone's focused on completing things as a siloed project or as a set project, or as a feature. But there isn't like thinking about the feature and how it integrates into the platform or how the platform integrates into the business, right? So is thinking about it as an integrated whole, as a product, so it's shifting that idea of going from more project approach to more product approach. So I think that the conversation is happening, but it's happening using, as you've mentioned, Sarah, different language. It's a different term. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's still undergoing, but sooner or later, I think there will be a lot of new things coming out from this movement. And also, there's also, I don't know, Jing, are you watching the team topology? There's a group of people are talking about team first in software engineering space. The idea is that because it's going to be, because there's a lot of similarities, right, in software amongst the social activities. The idea is that in social activities, you think people first. Right? You're trying to understand, you build sympathies, and you establish some kind of protocols where people can talk to each other. And because of software engineering, for the past couple of decades, more people are focused on the engineering bits. And we are talking about practices, processes, and we are talking about trying to codify what you need to do. And this group of people started to realize that actually the most important thing is about developers, and developers are human. So we need to understand their cognitive load. We need to understand whether we are putting too much load on them. And that's ultimately causing insufficient manpower to handle the problem. It's an interesting trend, but I really like it because I feel if we are using Cynefin terms, the constraint we need to understand for software engineering is actually on the human side. It's not on the technology side.
Yeah, I agree. It's the other concept in complexity is actually not to manage for efficiency, but to manage for effectiveness. And what they found, particularly in human systems, is human systems require slack, right? That's the whole concept of that. Yeah, you know, like how do we build slack in? So how do we return like 10-15% of developers' time back to them so they can go and do learning? So a lot of the conversations I have with teams is, oh, you know, the reason why I'm making mistakes, I'm not finishing my work is because, you know, I have to go and learn, you know, like this Wix code has changed or something like that. I need to go educate myself. So it's how do we actually build that slack in? How do we return it? And beyond that, it's also how do you actually measure not your efficiency, but the optimal level of inefficiency that you need for your organization. So what is the inefficiency you need to build in, which is, I think, counterintuitive. It's not what we're taught. We're taught always maximize efficiency. So when we tell our clients that, what is the optimal inefficiency you need to maintain to be effective? Oh, they always stop and think, you know, like, what does that mean?
I would love to invite you to come in to do this. You know, we're officially trying to shut down the 997. You probably heard about it, right? Started, a couple of internet companies started this work habit about starting 9 o'clock in the morning. You finish at 9 o'clock at night. You work 7 days a week instead of 5. So that's called 997.
Okay.
And it becomes so bad, and the government officially has to say, like, I'm going to shut down your power. I'm going to shut down your building power in order to prevent you to do 997. Yeah, no, sorry, 996. So it's 6 days out of 7. So 6 days out of 7.
Yeah. So
that's actually quite it's counterintuitive, like what you just described, right? So human, in order for human to perform from a long-term perspective, you need to give them time to do to take snap. And this 996, how people is dealing with this is argue that regardless of what I do, you will ask me to work on hours. So I'd rather be efficient.
Yeah. So in labor law, like labor unions, right, in the West, one of the biggest ways that people in the unions actually revolt is to work to scope. As in, I'm going to do exactly what my minimum is, what I've been asked to do, and nothing more than what I've been asked to do. And that's actually the biggest way you can revolt and rebel against your employer. Because if I do only what you've told me to do and I accomplish that, trust me, the job will not get done. The job only gets done because people are intuitively saying, oh, to get this done, I also need to go and do this 5 or 6 other things. I need to go and get into contact with the person who's managing this part of the project. You know, it's actually, it's not about what's written that needs to be done. It's all the parts in between, you know, and that's not captured in, I mean, I guess in agile terms, it's context switching. The context switching is terrifying, right? It takes up so much mental energy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, software essentially it's a design thing, right? So there's a lot of uncertainties. Like when we write code, like 2 people will never write the same. Even you give them the same requirement, they will have different naming systems. They will have different ideas about where to put the code. It's just like even one line of code, right? 2 people will have two different ideas. So it's intellectual work. I totally agree. Like it's going to be hard to just manage it with old manufacturer thinking. You have to looking at it from intellectual work perspective. People do need time to think. I do think that's important. And in software engineering space, a lot of leaders need to control themselves, right? So a lot of them understand the constraint, but somehow I think they still believe that working longer hours is still better than working shorter hours.
Yeah.
At least I guess that in Cynefin terms, that's a constraint they can manipulate, right? They cannot manipulate somebody's mind. Like I cannot manipulate, like say I want Ma Chang to say something about it, right? So I want him to say exactly the word I want. I cannot control that. But what I can control is I say, okay, so Ma Chang, you need to work long hours.
Yeah, I can work long hours. Yeah. I
hope
will.
your boss is not on this talk show.
No way. Okay, so I mute myself.
But anyway, so I think it's interesting. Like we are looking at software nowadays from managing complexity perspective, and from that perspective, then you have been applying Cynefin for a while. Any kind of a tools or practices you would recommend, which is different from what we're doing now, right? So we're doing process, drawing the diagrams, making regulations and codifying things, right? So and publish some regulations, and you have to do this, and you have to work 996. Anything like you think is going to be helpful and it can gradually start to change people's mind.
So a lot of the work that I do as well, and it's linked to complexity, linked to Cynefin, particularly anthro-complexity and people. And I know that in software, you guys also use it as this concept of stories. You use user stories, for example. So, we know that that's the best way to identify user needs. Not necessarily, because I'm not a coder, right? I'm not going to be able to tell somebody what I need. I can tell them what my problem is, or I needed to get this done and this couldn't do it for me. Like that's a more effective story because it provides the context of my challenge. So a lot of the work that I've been involved in helping organizations to understand complexity, anthro-complexity, and how working with people, you can't just utilize this very firm guidelines like as though it's a mechanical system. It's actually through collecting stories from the system. So there are many ways to do this. You can run this through workshops. We also utilize software tools like SenseMaker. There are other tools that can help us to capture stories from within the system. And what we found is if you ask someone a direct question, right, they don't interpret it. Whereas if you ask them an indirect question, they will describe it. And what we try to do is actually design our studies so that the question design encourages description. So I'll give an example since we're on the topic of, how do we support employees? How do we make their lives better instead of 996? Is instead of asking your employee, how happy are you to work here? Give me on a scale of 0 to 10, tell me how happy you are working here. The chances are the employee is not going to be very honest, because they know, it might make my department look bad. Oh my God, my boss might think it's me, So instead of doing that, we ask them in a very different kind of question is, if your friend was offered a job in your company, what story would you share with them about what it's like to work here? So you open up a very different kind of questioning, very different type of reflective thinking and feedback. And imagine if you do that across, like 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 people, and you have stories, but also, the way that we do it is the stories are indexed by the people when they share it. So we ask them, is the story about, for example, tools and processes? Is it about skills and people, or is it about tools and technology? That gives us a sense of across 20,000, if I have 15,000 stories that are indexed toward people and skills and very few toward the rest, I know I have a problem with people and skills. And then I can still go back to the story and understand what the context was. So it's capturing both the story, but also the indexing, so we can actually make sense of stories at scale.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Jane, I think Dave also talked a lot about narratives and the greatness of human capability about storytelling and imagination. Right? So that's a unique capability so far. We know that only human can do.
Yes.
That's actually an interesting point. Like you started with the term we are quite familiar with in agile software development. We talk about the user stories. Yeah, I think it's a great point. I did encounter quite sometimes people are challenging because they're only looking at a user story from requirement management perspective. Because when we're trying to explain, we say, okay, user story is a method for managed user requirements. From that perspective, people will always challenge us and say, hey, this is not rigid enough. In the sense, like you only give a very rough template. Like the traditional format is given, when, then, right? So given who is going to be the user, and then when it did this or she did this, then something is going to happen. So this is a traditional way of describing the user story. But I think we should looking from what you just described. We should have looking from a storytelling, from a narrative perspective. That actually gives a chance between the business people and technology people to communicate. That's actually quite interesting. I think that's a good point. That's a really good point. Like next time I'm going to explain to my client and say, well, user story is not for describing user requirement in template, but also it's going to be a chance for both parties to start the conversation. And through the conversation, you should be able to have a better understanding of each other.
Yeah, I agree.
You guys use the narrative and storytelling a lot, right? So I saw this. You just mentioned the sense maker, which is the technique. I think you and Dave developed back years ago. Have you guys any significant use so far?
Well, many, of course. So I use it here with the Singapore government. So to do like citizen engagement. So if they need to pass a new policy, for example, they want to consult the citizenry, or for example, when COVID hit, we have a GovTech department that produces all of our apps and government forms and all that. So it was very useful to actually utilize citizen narratives to understand as you're going about, because there are all these restrictions, right? What are some of the challenges? So then so it's a very interesting thing, because it's government seeking citizen stories to tell GovTech what you need to build to facilitate citizen lives. Right. So
translation is interesting.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about connecting stories from different people. You're not asking them direct yes or no question. You're not asking them to say 1 to 10, give me the number. You actually ask them to say, describe something in your mind that hits you the most, and you capture those stories. And then through the stories, you analyze the constraints or the same, or trying to understand the boundary conditions amongst that, and then you try to move it, right? That's how you guys do it.
Yes, precisely. For example, when COVID hit, I think the Singapore GovTech was the first one to release the code into a public source for the tracing, for our tracing app. So it was interesting, because then other governments started taking it on and asking to utilize the code. So we made it open source. So it started off as a very simple requirement, right? But you can see how it grows because the need is organic. And of course, then every country takes it on and it becomes their own. I've seen some of the Chinese apps. They're very cute. You've got like different icons for your vaccination status and stuff. Yeah,
we have different avatars for different cities, right? Like my city, like I'm from Chengdu. Like the barcode, we have a barcode, and on top of the barcode is a panda. And Beijing is different, right? But Shanghai is also different. Shanghai is you have a city landscape. Like in my city, like Chengdu, if you're vaccinated, you have a panda without mask. If you have not received vaccination, your panda is going to be showing with a mask.
I love that. But you see, like that's for me is interesting because initially when we first got it, there was no vaccination. Vaccination came a year after contact tracing app was launched. Right. And then they slowly added it because they said, oh, we need to, if people want to go into a shopping center or a mall or a restaurant, they need to be able to tell. So you start seeing that the need evolves organically. And then, for this story, it's so beautiful because it's not just user need. You're actually folding in the stories of the cities, the icons of the cities, and it becomes like as a citizen of Chengdu, for example, I'm proud of the pandas. It's cute. I want to, you're actually tapping into human nature. If it had just been an app saying, yes, you've been vaccinated, no, you have not, it just wouldn't be as fun. So it's stories on many different levels, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think in software engineering, we need to embrace more of the human side. Because nowadays it's pretty hardcore. Even we talk about, because one of the articles you wrote talking about Daoism, that strikes me a lot, to be honest. Because when I read that article, I started to reflect on the software side, right? I'm a software developer. I work in software almost all my career. I started to realize that yes, like innovation is important, and digitalization or digital transformation is hot on the market, and almost every organization is talking about. But how to do that, right? So first of all, I think there's a misleading, like you can plan it as step 1, 2, 3, and then you becomes a digital business or digital enterprise. That's a lot of people realize that that's not even possible because there's a lot of hidden constraints you don't understand. And that hidden constraint, like you said, like it's not restricting it. Some of them are actually enabling you to do something. And the second aspect is that you can't think from you can't always use analytical thinking, right? By analytical, I mean like you can slicing and dice and say, hey, these are 5 components. If I do this 5 components, I will get this. This is not true anymore. That's where your article hits me.
It's so I spoke to we've been doing some digital transformation studies with organizations as well. So we're collecting stories of narratives in organizations about the challenges of digital transformation. You know what the number one problem is? The number one problem is getting people to use the technology. Sure. It's not the technology, right? Technology on its own is not useful. People have to want to use it. And when we ask, then the follow-up question is, what would make you use it? You say it's other people using it. So it's a problem that keeps building itself. So you actually need to make technology usable. People actually have to like the tool. It's not just about I build it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I launch it. It's at each stage, have you checked the user usability, the interface, whether people are responsive? Is this something people want to use? From a technology and innovation perspective, the sort of example that comes to mind is, the kick scooters. I don't know if you have them in China.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We have that, yeah.
You know how it became very big?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But before the kick scooter, I don't know if you remember, there was an innovation called the Segway. You know, the standing one?
That's available. That's available in Singapore. We had that in magazines. But I don't think any city actually in China implement that. It's way too big.
No.
It's
it never took off. Yeah, it never took off.
Right.
But you know, when the Segway first came out, right? The developers of that Segway were saying, oh, you know, you should look at the anti-gravity aerodynamics of this. They were so focused on the specs.
Technology side,
yeah, the specs of the product, but they never user tested it. And then when it launched, nobody wanted to use it, right? Whereas the kick scooter, if you compare them, the first kick scooter was a child's toy. Yeah. And then it evolved because people said, oh, this is usability, and it incrementally evolved. So, you know, there is this beauty, like, try it. They say for something to appeal, it has to be good, it has to be beautiful, and it has to be true, right? This is one of those golden triangles, right? Some things are very true and very good, but it just doesn't pass the beauty test. People don't want to use it, right? And some things are beautiful or appealing to people, neither good nor true. But I think at the end of the day, if we're wanting to build software that people can use, that's the main barrier. People have to want to use it. It doesn't matter how beautiful your specs are.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good reminder for software people, because to be honest, I think COVID is a threat for human being, but for us, it's a booster. To be honest, I think previously, if we're talking about this kind of barcode, right? So at least my parents' generation will refuse to use it, and now they have to accept the fact that they have to use it.
Yeah,
they were forced. So almost like because of a COVID, everybody have to have this barcode in China. It has to be green in order for you to travel. Otherwise, you have to stay home. If you don't have it, then sorry, you can't enter the public space. Right? But I think it's a vivid reminder that software people need to realize that the COVID situation in the foreseeable future will pass, and we need to think more about allowing people to use the technology. Yeah, that's very true. I think that's actually something software people need to realize.
Yeah,
for sure. And also in that article, I think that you talk about Wu Wei, right? That's a Chinese translation. Not everybody agree with that. The English term is operatic or apparel, right? That's very philosophical. To me, like, that's something with innovation we're trying to explain. You have worked very closely with Dave. Maybe like you can share some insight about that, because people in China in general, we are very keen to understand how to be innovative, right? So as an organization, even as a team, we want to be an innovative team. You know, the pace of change in China right now, not even in software, but also in other industry, is like accelerating every day.
Yeah. I just want to say it's funny that Chinese firms are saying this, because Chinese firms are so innovative. It's remarkable. It's but so aparia is actually, the root word is Greek. So the Greek, what it translates to, or what it means is it's like a knot. So I heard from my friends who are Greek, they say that when they're in school, right, if they don't understand something, they'll actually raise their hand and tell the teacher, I have an aparia. So I have a knot in my thinking, you know, so I can't break past, there is no flow, right? So I have a knot in my thinking. You either have to undo the knot, you have to cut the knot, or you have to re-entangle, right? So I think that if we think about innovation, it's the same. Right. So a lot of innovation, and Dave talks about this, it actually comes from this is a biological concept called acceptation. So it's a very big word which simply means radical repurposing. So you find something that was initially developed for one thing, and then you repurpose it for something else. That kick scooter, again, started off as a child's toy, and now people are using it to travel, right? They just improved it, and then they shifted the context, and they made it something else. In other examples, actually, the microwave oven came from the people working on the nuclear magneto, right? And then they realized that, oh, this heat can cook food. So if not for acceptation, right, we move this from one application to another, we would not have microwave ovens. So if we think about it, is sometimes when we encounter a situation, you're like, oh, that doesn't quite fit the frame it's supposed to be in, is to actually not force it, right? If we try to force it into the right side of Cynefin, the ordered domain, right? Because it's supposed to be in this causal order, I'm going to try to force it, right? What you're going to do is either you lose a really good opportunity to do something very innovative because you're trying to force it to fit the requirements or something like that. You might lose an opportunity, or you might actually be ignoring the fact that this is not the situation that you're used to. You need to think about it differently. So aporia is basically this state of conscious confusion. I am confused, but I know that I am confused, right? And not I'm confused, but I'm going to pretend that I'm not confused, which is, I think, very common for people because you don't want to lose face. You don't want to admit that you don't know. You don't want to admit that you're wrong, right? But it's okay. I think it's a better thing to say, I don't know, and I need to think about this differently. And that is all aporia is. It's just a word for that. And this concept of knots is interesting because acceptation is re-entangling things differently, right? I have something.
Yeah. I think then you just remind me, like I was just having dinner. To be honest, I had a couple of wines before I joined this talk show. People are talking about 焦虑, anxiety. Like if you're looking at Ma Chang's hair, right? It is super 焦虑. And I think in general we agree, like in this society, given the pace, how fast it's moving, everybody becomes 焦虑, right? The anxiety level is high.
Yeah.
But you have to face it. It's not to say like you can eliminate that. It's not possible. But by acknowledging that actually gives you a chance to keep moving. You know that I'm super 焦虑, like I'm anxious. I don't know where am I going, but I know that if I'm going forward, if I learn something, if I chat with people, I becomes less 焦虑. That actually reminds me like what we are discussing during the dinner time, because a lot of senior techies will get together like after 35, 40s, and there's a guy who was 53, and he was saying like, why you guys are so anxious, right? So I just started my company 50, and I called the first product. And what are you guys talking about, right? So you guys are still young. I'm 50. You guys are 30s and 40s. You tell me like you're anxious. But it just reminds me an interesting case. Like everybody have to acknowledge like there's things I don't know.
Yes.
And a lot of things we don't know. But by acknowledging that, and we become more comfortable about taking steps forward. And by taking steps forward, we learn something. And maybe something will pop up, and that's probably a natural way of being innovative in the sense of understanding there's a future possibilities. Yeah. And also one of the interesting diagrams you guys draw is that you starting have a central domain, which is aporia, and you have directions and going to different domains. Even go to the clear domain.
Yes.
That's something I think we had this public training last time, and people asked, how can you just go from unknown, or you know yourself is like in 焦虑, right? So all of a sudden you become, I'm not jolly anymore. Like I can do this, and this is going to be a big hit. Right? They asked us for the examples, and we couldn't come up with other domains. We actually come up with something.
I think the context of, because again, right, I'm very interested in this concept of context, but and I know in domain-driven design, you translate it as 上下文中. Right. But
context,
yes. But that's a very specific translation. Right. Whereas if you do a very simple Google Translate, you get many different options. You get 语境, 场景, 前后什么键, I can't remember now. But basically, you start to see that context is all of it. 上下文中 has a very structural, hierarchical type of, and the beautiful thing about the Chinese language is that it's pictorial and it's descriptive. Whereas the English word context, it could mean anything. And what I found is people don't know how to understand it. Whereas Chinese provides us with a framing to understand things. 上下文中 has a hierarchical, structural aspect to it. 前后构建 is about, what did you inherit, and then what needs to come after it, right? And then, whereas in 环境 or 语境, it's the general context. And if you think about it that way, it provides you many different ways to think about context instead of just one. And so in the context of that context, drawing from aporia immediately going into clear is very specific, only done in an emergency setting. Right. So in an emergency, it's chaos. Remember, in the chaotic domain, all the all the different aspects are acting randomly. If you need to stabilize, right? So there are some things you might say, I just need to use emergency protocols and stabilize this. So, for example, in COVID, again, let's all go into lockdown. That was actually a very rigid thing. Yeah. But we need to buy time, and that bought us time. Yeah. So within that context of emergency management, it makes sense.
Yeah. That reminds me, I think one of the examples Dave was joke about that online is how Chinese government did it in Wuhan compared to the UK government. The UK government announced that, okay, so next week we're going to lock down the city. And what happened is that people flee out of the city, of course, right? It's human nature. You can control it. You tell them, like, I'm going to lock down the city next week. And you give them a week time to leave the city. And they end up with high cost about control it. The measure they're trying to put in place is to say control the spreading. But because of the protocol, the old protocols was in place, they're trying to say, okay, I'm going to lock down next week. Actually saying like there's no lockdown because people will get out of the city before you lock down the city.
Yeah, and then they brought COVID into the country.
That's an interesting case. Versus like Dave was saying, like a Chinese government, when they launched it, it's already done.
Yeah.
When they announced that the city is locked down, and you can be sure like they already did it.
Yeah, it's true. So yeah, I think that was a very good example of going immediately. So we don't know, but we need to buy time, and therefore we're going to do this very drastic thing to buy ourselves some time. Yeah.
Do you like? There's an interesting question because a lot of I was discussing with because it's the next wave of entrepreneurism rising up in China, especially with this metaverse. People see a lot of new opportunities. Almost like people feels like I will be next Ma Huateng, right? So I will be next Ma Huateng. So Tencent, the founder of Tencent. So you can gradually see like it's warming up. A lot of the young generations and started saying, okay, I want to do this. I will be next Tencent. You also mentioned like from the innovation perspective, expectation is radically repurposing existing things. That's, I think, one of the masters is Steve Jobs. Right? People generally recognize that Steve Jobs is, there's no invention from Steve Jobs, but he is a genius in repurposing things for different usage.
Yes.
And that's called innovation. But do you guys see that from metaverse or different other, I guess, perspectives? Do you see like a radical innovation, another way of radical innovation, just purely we have never thought about it, and it's come from, maybe feels like come from nowhere?
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's I think it's there. I don't know if you're familiar with Buckminster Fuller.
No, not this one.
Yeah, he's a philosopher, but he's also a technologist.
Okay.
And he was saying that with improvement, it just means that with technology, right? And technology is going so quickly, it improves so quickly. It just means that we'll be able to create and build and develop more things for more people with less resources over time. For me, the interesting thing about the metaverse is you are creating whole worlds with nothing but light and code. If you think about it that way, the metaverse is in and of itself a bit of a massive innovation. And what I've seen as an example, which is very inspiring, is there was this one story about how this group of world builders, they built a virtual VR library in the metaverse with all the banned books. And then they donated it, I think it was to Iran, so that Iranian people can read the books that they want to read without the restrictions of the government policy. So you start to see that the metaverse is a very interesting place. You can go in and borrow a book that is supposed to be banned in your country. But the metaverse right now, right? And that's why you start, the debates are coming already. Do countries need to build digital twins, for example? What is the reason?
The border. There's the border in the metaverse, right? So
precisely.
Or metaverse is just like an open source world, right? So there's no border.
Yeah. So we don't know because it just started. But that was a very good example because it's like, wow, what an interesting use of this new technology, right? That completely took me by surprise. I'm involved now in a virtual reality group with a group of world builders, and we're building a simulation within VR. So in the US, there are all these anti-mask protests that are happening even till today. It's gotten to the point where protests are now seen as a public health crisis because of the protests, so many people are ending up in the hospitals and their health workers are overworked. So what happens, as we talked about, people who have no, like slack, they start to get tired. And as a health worker, it means that you're no longer able to be compassionate to your patients.
Right.
So one of the simulations that we're building as a world build is to build a protest and get first responders and health workers to go through the protest. And we built different checkpoints. And we want to see if a protest in VR, and we built certain things in. So for example, are you a masker or an anti-masker? And then we built different type of challenges in for them. And it's to see, can we use something like the metaverse to train compassion and empathy in first responders? We don't know, right? But it's not just the metaverse. Again, it's how do we use it to interact with real world needs, right? And that's what's interesting for me. There is technologically, it's fantastic. It's nothing but light and code, and you're building whole universes. But it's how it can be used exactively in parallel to move to respond to human need. And where is that human need? At the end of the day, I think it still goes back to that.
I'm conscious about time. Matang, do you have anything to you want to talk, or anything from the audience so far?
Yeah, well, actually, I think the guys are just, they just said that Jen's Chinese is great, especially for the context part. Yeah, that's great. That was so nice. And
yeah, we'll have a talk. I think then we'll have a talk about. I think there's more to say about Cynefin itself than this talk.
Yeah, sure. And actually, well, in this, let's get back to this domain-driven development summit, which will happen about 2 weeks later. And Jen will also give us this a session regarding the Cynefin framework, especially with this context, not only about 上下文, but also about more a lot of different aspects of that. If you guys would like to learn more from Jen, just go and buy the ticket of DDD, DDD Summit, and from us, from 破马张飞, from us, you will get like 40% off. So that is a really big discount. So I switch that to Chinese, that will be more attractive. So 破马张飞直播间 DDD 门票3日门票只要6折6折，大家赶紧这个扫码我们右下角的这个二维码，可以大家截个屏，然后去扫码，然后可以领这个我们专属的6折券啊。然后 Okay, so here is one question that we can, maybe we can ask for from our audience. Now here, just one question, okay? So if you have more questions, go to DDD Summit and ask Jen directly, okay? Okay, so there is only one question. So what's the, the relationship between the metaverse and the DDD? So this is one question. So, who would like to answer?
I can try first. To me, there's no direct relationship. I think the only relationship for me is that a lot of clients is asking, say, well, Sharon, looks like metaverse is a lot of to do with technology. We would like you to give a session. So for me to gather all this information is throw the buzzword to everybody, like people like them. Like you guys are going to talk about that, and I becomes a receiver, right? So once I receive enough information, and I started to digest and come up with some of my explanations. That's my point of that's my 2 cents with metaverse and DDD. But to me, I don't have a direct relationship with this two.
All right,
I can try. Yeah, I can try. I think that I've been, like just surfing the internet. The company that used to be called Facebook, which is now called Meta, is doing a lot of recruitment at the moment, and a lot of their recruitment are into social research, either qualitative or academic. Right, because it's still an evolving space. There are some people staking claims in it already. I think that the metaverse doesn't have domains yet because the business model is still open, but it will evolve, and I think it will be very interesting. And I think like for example, people who make art are already selling their art through the metaverse as NFTs, for example. But that's still a very small space. And I think over time, the domains will emerge and evolve. So right now, it's still unclaimed territory for the most part.
Yeah, well, from that perspective, I think then there's a I think it's more more about, because the two important things about DDD, right? One thing is we believe we don't need translators. We need to establish a common language. That's actually the, I think from long-term perspective, a translator doesn't work. Establishing a common language is ultimately the important thing for people to work together. Right? That's the first one, so-called ubiquitous language. The second perspective is that the domain itself is ever evolving. Today's domain will change tomorrow. So that in that perspective, and also because of the change, because it's ever changing, we just need to know enough to get started. And it will unfold along the way you do development work. So from that perspective, that two perspective, I think there's something to do with metaverse. I guess almost like we have to do this way if we want to truly believe that a metaverse is going to unfold, and maybe next generation will live in a parallel universe.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Cool. That's a great vision. And yeah, well, maybe there might not be a direct connection between these two words, but as we discussed today, the connections are everywhere right now. So maybe they can connect one with another. And also, as Jen said, that currently there is no such domains in metaverse. But that would be the chances for you guys to define the domains. So come on, be next Pony Ma, Ma Huateng. Be next Pony
Yeah, that's Tencent, founder of Tencent. Yeah, we need to invite. To be honest, I think DDD need to invite more people like them from different backgrounds. And ultimately, I think. Because if you're looking at the universities, right, nowadays, right, so we know Tsinghua universities and Peking universities, top universities in China. I think I started talking about cross-discipline. They have set up classes. They are trying to educate the next generation with cross-discipline, multi-dimensional thinking. That's very different from our education process, right? So I'm doing computer science during my whole academic life. Nowadays, you started to see people like they are not just come from computer science. They actually started biology, right? Some of them I even have medicine doctors.
Yeah.
So there will be the doctor of philosophies,
Yeah.
It's always called PhD.
That's why we believe that DDD is going to change the industry, right? It's a small world. It's 3Ds, but through that we're trying to build a platform. I'm still disappointed. Like even this year, there's no people from the business side. Like I'm really want people to join us from the business side. Right, just traditional business. I'm talking about if you are doing banking, financial service, nothing to do with computer science, nothing to do with programming. You're just doing on the service side, on the financial service side. I want more people join us. Maybe next year. We'll try.
Yeah. Well, but in the other way, as you said that in this after the digital transformation, in this digital world, the digital itself is business. So in this way, those guys are already business people. Not pure business people, not the old money, but still.
I think those coming out of universities, like early, late 20s, even the younger ones, they're all, even business majors, even literature majors, know how to code now. It's an essential part of their education. So I think it's going to happen, maybe in a shorter time frame than we think. I don't think it's going to need a whole generation.
Yeah. All right. So the time is up. So we won't stay up the whole night. So let's get to the ending part. well, if you guys are not, you are still looking for some some other insights from both of them, just go to DDD Summit. Okay, so just buy the ticket. Okay, 40% discount, 40% off. Okay, nice. Well, at the usually at the end of our webcast, we ask the guests to give us some, to give our audience leave some sentences, just 1 or 2 sentences for them to maybe inspiring or a little bit interesting. So you can just say whatever you want, just a little bit like maybe 2-3 sentences or 30 seconds, something like that. So maybe Xiaoran can just do this by example so that Jen will know how to do that. You want to leave something for our leave some words for our audience.
Okay. I
Good.
think something come out from today's conversation for me really is about I think all of us have to realize that dealing with complexity is, you don't need to be you don't need to be rejecting, or you don't need to becomes more 焦虑 when you realize that complexity exists. You need to be you need to get yourself comfortable with complexity, and you need to realize that that's just a reality, right? So I think the most important, if you are doing software development or you just make a living, right? So you have a daily life. You have to realize that complexity is all surrounding you. I think the very first step is to get comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so very practical. So the first step is there. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Well, I can just reinstate that in Chinese. 我觉得今天的这个讨论里边最重要的一点，包括今天晚上的 dinner 里面，大家也讨论到这一点。我觉得克服这种对复杂性和对不确定性的恐惧或者焦虑的最好方法，就是意识到说，它将是你生活的常态。Okay, back to you then.
All right. My parting lines are one of my favorite lines is, knowledge is a martial art. 知识是武术, right?
Yeah,
so it's yeah, that's right. Because I think that we live in a world where we're so in our heads all the time. It's a cognitive, mentally led universe. And to add on to what Xiaoran said is becoming comfortable with uncertainty and becoming is actually becoming more grounded. It's understanding how to see the patterns unfolding and then to step into the flow of energy. And I think, again, I think traditional Chinese martial arts, Qigong, or Tai Chi Chuan have a lot to teach us about that. Is how do you observe the patterns and see where the energy is flowing and step into the flow. So do not be afraid of it, right? It's to step back, watch the patterns unfold, and then to step into the opportunity.
Yeah. I think you just, every time I chat with you, it reminds me, like, because even today, like the topics, like we should talk more about the Eastern philosophy. Because today people are using entropy, right? That's very common in software engineering space nowadays. But I think we need to start getting comfortable about Chinese Kung Fu.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even though 我中文不是讲得很好，但是我本身觉得这个是很重要的东西。
Yeah. So that's if we articulate that correctly, the whole society needs to be more about 文化自信。
对。
Yeah, that's all right. So next time when Jen come back to our webcast, we hope that there will be the pure Chinese
We're talking about Eastern philosophy. I think Jen will be
yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Great. Well, before the the lucky draw, we will still have some advertisements, some commercials here. One thing still about this domain-driven development summit, which will start since the 2nd of December. And so everybody, well, this time it's online. It's purely online. So you can. There will be also a lot of workshop there, right? There will be a lot of workshop to help you practice a lot.
Yeah, we're trying to do it online. Bear with us. 我们会在这个线上尝试一下，但这个当然有一些经验啊，但是对很多的人来说，可能第一次尝试这种在线的工作坊，所以在这儿呢也是希望大家更多给我们一些耐心。
Right. 所以那咱们就切回中文吧，我快速的把这个几个广告快速念完，然后到最后呢，大家就抽奖。现在就是大家已经迫不及待了啊！好，小伙伴们呢，就是可以扫码去关注我们的大会啊，我们这个领域驱动设计，刚才说错了，domain-driven design，sorry for that 这个一直和另外一个 DDD 搞混，我们现在最近一直是 deadline-driven development.
Deadline-driven, that works for everybody.
That's another one. Okay, so so this is the first one, and also 切回中文啊，然后大家对那个 Jane 如果说觉得还有一些其他的问题或者想听更多啊，大家去参加我们的 DDD 啊领域驱动设计峰会。然后萧然也会在这个峰会上，对吧？与此同时呢，大家假如说线下想见到萧然老师的话，我们下周6和这个得物会联合举办一个在上海的线下的互联网项目管理论坛，然后大家可以这个稍后可以去报名参加这个我们之后的话会在群里和其他一些地方会放广告出来。我们还有这个飞哥现在是在厦门是吧？正在交付一个这个 OKR coach 的课程之前在我们节目里面也说了很多次了，就关于 OKR 的课程希望他们这次打磨之后呢有更多的经验，以后大家可以有更多的机会来尝试我们 OKR coach 的这样的一个课程。还有就是我们 QECon 也是改期但是呢这个好像说之前是线下改到12月底12月中旬，但是现在好像北京那边都搞不了线下了是吧？所以说有可能会延期到明年大家再等一个相应的通知就好。好，那这个最后还有一件事情，就是本周日Safe Day 即将开幕所以有小伙伴假如想参加 Safe Day 的话还有最后的机会可以去参加这个Safe Day 的报名。现在这个会场呢基本已经准备好了，所以虚位以待星期天大家会场不见不散。那最后那我们就要开始我们的抽奖了抽奖环节。这次呢我们抽奖的奖品大家这个知道说我们抽奖的奖品这个猜也能猜到对吧？这是肯定是门票嘛，这个 DDD 大会的门票domain-driven 这个 design summit 的门票，所以小伙伴们打起精神然后最后时刻我们来抽一波。这次的实际的奖品呢，我们其实会包括几块这个其中不光是咱们这个3天的门票当然还有刚才提到的 workshop 的这样的一个门票。所以呢，各位小伙伴，这样的话呢，我们会有2张workshop 的门票和1张我们的这个大会的这个通票，就是3天的通票。所以这里边来这个等一会儿萧然老师帮我们抽2张这个工作坊的票好吧，然后 Jane you will just get the luckiest guy to get this 3-day ticket. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, lucky draw. Okay, so let's rock. Okay, so 萧然老师你选一个关键词吧you pick one lucky word and a keyword for our audience.And then we will do the draw. 焦虑 Okay, so it's in Chinese. So 焦虑来 各位小伙伴，大家把这个搞起来啊，焦虑起来啊！有人写的第一啊，感觉好像不对啊。他们有人说下次记得给这个嘉宾准备红酒啊。我们这个节目呢不是巴叉说啊，这个巴叉说是有红酒的，但这个我没有啊。
I am too wise. To be honest, I told Zheng about it. Yeah, Zheng said, "Are you assuming like I didn't?"
I also had 2 wines.
There you go. That's Friday. Yeah, TGIF.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Afterwards, it's fine. It's fine. Okay. Okay. Let's go. So, yeah. Somebody would like. Well, you can just say stop, and then I'll take the screenshot. So, 2 here. Are you ready?
You want me to say it now? Stop.
Yeah. You said already?
Okay, you stop now.
Okay. Let's see who are these 2 lucky guys. Okay, so one is 哔哩下划线306146242484，哔哩下划线306146242484。好，这位小伙伴啊，恭喜你获得了工作坊 workshop 的票啊。然后另外一位他写的是括号不要焦虑啊。我先问一下这个校园老师给不给
I like the spirit.
好的，
我们应该给他。我觉得这个你看多好，对吧？
哇，这个一定要给他，真的一定要给他。
好，那是 Kiki 啊，2050啊，也是我们一位老朋友。好，恭喜你获得了这次的这个工作坊门票啊。好，那我们接下来啊就要抽大奖了，最后的大奖，大家坚持一下，好吧？这个我们的小伙伴啊，来 Jane 啊 ，You want to give us a lucky word？
武术。
武术，好啊，It's in Chinese 啊，中文武术啊。刚才大家可能没有听懂啊，那个就是Jane 给我们最后的留言，他说 Knowledge is martial arts， 就是知识是武术，就是对，很有趣啊，非常有力量的一句话啊，对 ，nice 啊，忽然觉得我们变成了一个这个动作类节目，这是武术。好的，这个 Jane，well you can say stop whenever you want，yeah.
Stop.
Okay, let's see who is the lucky guy. Okay, so this guy, 这位小伙伴是 XXGFJ 啊 ，XXGFJ 啊，这位小伙伴啊，恭喜这位小伙伴啊，获得了我们的这个3天门票啊，全价票，好吧？这个特别棒啊，这个非常感谢这位小伙伴送来了幸运。那这一次呢，今天啊，这个是我们跟滴滴的这个合作的第1场直播啊，之后下周6我们还有1场啊，下一场呢可能更深入到这个跟滴滴相关的这个内核里边啊，所以小伙伴说这个是站票还是坐票啊？这个very good question 啊 ，you can try. Okay, so yeah. The lucky guy said, "Thanks, great thanks, Jane." Yeah, very received. Nice. 小伙伴们直接扫描我们屏幕右下角的二维码，然后来兑奖，好吧？这个站票还是坐票，你自己想站就站，想坐就坐，好吧？可以是挂票啊，自己。Okay, so this is could be the end of this webcast. And the next time in our next week's show, it will be back to Saturday. 将回到周6啊，我们会这个继续回到破瓦张飞熟悉的节奏啊。下周6晚，破瓦张飞同一时间，下一次我们的这个 DDD 的门票啊，大奖加码，所以各位小伙伴千万不要错过啊，我们会送出更多的门票，至于多几张啊，下次直播间告诉大家。好，那非常感谢。肖然老师和 Jane thank you Jane for coming and wish you guys can come back well maybe next time and give us some Chinese speech. All right, so thank you guys. 感谢2位老师，感谢线上各位小伙伴最后的陪伴。 啊，以及说我们破马张飞主创团队小伙伴在背后的支持。好，那破马张飞每周六晚9点15分 B 站直播间，大家不见不散啊！我们下周见，祝大家度过一个愉快的周末，拜拜。Have a nice weekend，
谢谢，
Good weekend， 周末愉快，拜拜，
拜
拜拜。